part 2 of this one-part series, we looked broadly at historian Tom Holland's attempt to pry the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment from this non-believer's
cold, dead hands.
His claim is that such are the proceeds of the Christian worldview, that Christianity is the water we all swim in, and that such philosophical, scientific, cultural, and moral progress was the result, a natural outgrowth of Christian thought, which, for some reason, took nearly 1,700 years, including the Reformation and the Enlightenment, to sink in. Ironically, it is the very hegemony of Christian thought in the Christian West which betrays this very notion. Because one must ask how it is that we're all so completely and exclusively saturated, bathed in the Christian worldview for so long, and not just in the Latin West where Christianity took root, but all over the world. Has it anything to do with the Enlightenment ideals Tom claims are intrinsically Christian? Did Enlightenment ideals play any part in Christianity's spread across the globe? Not even slightly. You will not find reason, religious pluralism, gentle persuasion, human dignity, equality, humility, or human rights in Christianity's despotic ascendancy in the West. Instead, you will find the kind of arrogance, zeal, violence, threats of violence, forced conversions, unearned and unwelcome dominion over others, which, while not unique to those following the tribal war god of Abraham, really does seem to flourish, especially amongst the Christians. From the deaths of Arianism and classical paganism, to the virtual genocide of the Cathars, to the Inquisition, Crusades, and the brutal Christian colonialism which caused the death of untold millions of indigenous peoples all over the world, Christianity has achieved dominion not by embracing the values of the Enlightenment, but by wielding the sword mercilessly. Tom seems to think that Christianity transformed the Roman Empire, whereas it seems clear to me that the Roman Empire transformed Christianity. Power corrupts, and when Christianity had absolute power, it was corrupted absolutely. The most obvious and far-reaching example being the doctrine of discovery, a series of papal bulls or proclamations which gave the various colonial powers of Europe the authority to take the lands of indigenous, non-Christian peoples all over the world and to subjugate them by force. With this doctrine of discovery in hand, Christian colonists and conquerors saw the indigenous, non-Christian peoples of the world as less than human and treated them as such. Tom likes to tell us that the concept of universal human rights is a Christian idea.
Say what?
I'd like to see him try to sell that to the native peoples of the Americas, Australia, India, Africa, and the various island nations all over the world whose experience has been quite the opposite. What Tom seems unable or unwilling to recognize is that there was one unique, most overwhelming idea Christianity embraced and imposed on the world, the root of all this nastiness. The idea that there is only one way to heaven and one path to knowing God, and that Christians had an obligation to make sure you embrace that one way, whether you like it or not. No man comes to the Father except through me, Jesus said. Strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. This was the supreme and governing ideal of pre-Enlightenment Christianity, and the Christians pursued it with a vengeance. That might actually be an understatement. And the margin for error, oh my hitch, it was microscopic. Friar Luis de Leon educated himself on and devoted himself to the translation of Christian religious texts. He was imprisoned for 5 years and barely escaped execution for translating the Song of Solomon into Spanish. He also criticized the Vulgate translation of the Bible, which had recently been made the official translation at the Council of Trent. The outrage, right? I mean, this guy clearly deserved to die, but somehow he got away with it. This quest for doctrinal purity, the idea that there is only one very narrow path to heaven and viewing anyone not following that path with absolute precision as a threat to the souls of everyone around them is what drove the Inquisition. This is the primary motivating ideal of pre-Enlightenment Christianity. The ideal that locked up Galileo for the rest of his life. The ideal that sent Giordano Bruno to the stake, where they burned him alive. This is the primary Christian value that gave us the murder of William Tyndale, the Oxford martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. Actual witch hunts. Endless war in Europe amongst not Christians and non-Christians, but Christians who thought that the Christians they were killing just didn't have it exactly right. And lest you think this kind of thing an aberration or departure from Christian thinking and idealism, please note that Christianity's biggest brain, St. Thomas Aquinas, approved of capital punishment for heresy. Quote, "They deserve not only to be separated from the church by excommunication, but also to be severed from the world by death," end quote. Aquinas specifically said that this is to be done for the salvation of others. Nor was torture out of the question for Christianity's other big brain, St. Augustine. From Alan Ryan's On Augustine, the Two Cities, quote, "Augustine took it for granted that being coerced into receiving the truth was a benefit, not a burden. It was a view one might expect from a man who thought that corporal punishment might be administered lovingly, and with the intention to bring the offender to his senses." Does any of this sound even slightly enlightened? Okay, admittedly, Aquinas' thoughts there sounded a little like Voltaire's death to heretics, right? And those comments from Augustine might as well have been lifted right out of David Hume's An Inquiry on the Coercion of Infidels. I believe it was Rousseau who said to turn the other cheek before you rob them of their lands, property, and any hint of human dignity. Yeah, I think it's in the very first part of Julie. These Christian morals and ideals, which Tom says inspired the Enlightenment thinkers, whatever he imagines them to be, were apparently so weak, so uninspiring to actual Christians, that after 1,000 years of Christian rule in the Latin West, the Christian Church neither embraced them nor advocated for them in any way. On the contrary. Next up, we'll be hopping back into Tom's fishbowl to check out the waters again. But this time, we'll be looking at the water Christianity was swimming in when the church arose, right up out of the tomb. We'll also look at some other ideologies that developed in those Christian waters that Tom finds so warm and inviting. Until then, I'm me. Thanks for watching.